Sarah Matthews stood at her kitchen window, watching her 28-year-old daughter Rebecca storm out of the driveway for what felt like the 100th time this year. The words still echoed in her mind like a slap across the face. "Mom, you don't understand life. You've never taken a real risk, never chased a dream. You're just safe and boring." The accusation cut deeper than any argument they'd ever had, because somewhere in Sarah's heart, she feared it might be true. Hi there, I'm Tina, and I want to share with you one of the most powerful stories I've ever encountered about a mother's love, disappointment, and the incredible way life can surprise us all. This is about Sarah, a woman who was tired of being called safe and boring by the daughter she'd sacrificed everything for. What Sarah did next will shock you, inspire you, and maybe even make you rethink everything you know about unconditional love. Stay with me until the end, because this story has a twist that will leave you speechless. If stories like this touch your heart, please give this video a like and subscribe to join our family of storytellers. Sarah had spent the last 30 years of her life being exactly what Rebecca accused her of being: careful, predictable, safe. After Rebecca's father walked out when she was just 3 years old, Sarah had made every decision with one goal in mind: providing stability for her daughter. She worked double shifts as a nurse at Denver General Hospital, saved every penny she could, and lived in the same modest 2-bedroom house in the suburbs for 25 years. While other single mothers went out on weekends or took vacations, Sarah stayed home, helping with homework, attending every school play, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that the very stability she'd worked so hard to create had somehow become a source of shame for Rebecca. Her daughter had graduated from college with a degree in architecture, full of dreams about designing eco-friendly homes and sustainable communities. But instead of starting small and building her career gradually, Rebecca wanted everything immediately. She'd applied for senior positions at prestigious firms, been rejected repeatedly, and now spent her days working part-time at a coffee shop while living in Sarah's basement, growing more bitter with each passing month. "You don't get it, Mom," Rebecca had said during their latest argument. "I have vision. I have passion. I'm not going to waste my life playing it safe like you did. I want to design that house on Maple Ridge. You know, the one with the solar panels and the green roof that we drive past every week. That's my dream house, and someday I'm going to build something even better." Sarah knew the house well. It was a stunning modern home in the most expensive neighborhood in Denver, worth at least $2 million, with innovative design features that Rebecca would point out and analyze every time they drove by it. What Rebecca didn't know was that her words had struck something deep inside Sarah that had been dormant for decades. Before Rebecca was born, before her husband left, Sarah had her own dreams. She'd wanted to travel, to write, to maybe even start her own business. She'd been accepted to a graduate program in creative writing, but had turned it down when she got pregnant. She'd saved money for a trip to Europe, but had spent it on Rebecca's private preschool instead. Year after year, dream after dream had been quietly set aside for the greater good of raising her daughter. That night, after Rebecca had slammed her bedroom door following their argument, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and did something she hadn't done in years. She opened her laptop and began researching. She looked up the house on Maple Ridge that Rebecca admired so much. She researched its history, its designer, its current market value. Then she did something that would have shocked anyone who knew her. She called a real estate agent. The conversation that followed would change everything. The house wasn't just for sale. The owners were desperate to sell quickly due to a job relocation. The asking price had already been reduced twice, and they were willing to consider creative financing options. Sarah had been saving money for 30 years, living frugally and investing wisely. She had more in her retirement accounts and savings than she'd ever told Rebecca about. As a veteran nurse with excellent credit and significant assets, she qualified for financing that most people could only dream of. But Sarah wasn't thinking about buying the house for herself. As she stared at the photos of the soaring ceilings, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the innovative green technology that Rebecca had praised so many times, a plan began forming in her mind. It was risky. It was completely unlike her, and it would use up nearly everything she'd saved for her retirement. Her financial advisor would probably think she'd lost her mind. Her friends would be shocked. Even Sarah herself couldn't quite believe what she was considering. Yet as she sat there in the quiet house, listening to Rebecca tossing and turning in the basement bedroom, Sarah realized that maybe it was time to stop being safe and boring. Maybe it was time to show her daughter that dreams weren't just for young people, that taking risks wasn't just for those who had nothing to lose. Maybe it was time to prove that sometimes the most powerful form of love is the kind that surprises everyone, especially yourself. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. She spent the entire day meeting with her real estate agent, her banker, and her financial advisor, setting in motion a plan that would either be the most beautiful gesture of her life or the most foolish mistake she'd ever made. Her hands trembled as she signed the preliminary paperwork, knowing she was about to drain her retirement savings for this one impossible dream. The real estate agent, Margaret, had known Sarah for years through mutual friends and couldn't hide her shock. "Sarah, honey, are you absolutely certain about this? This is a massive financial commitment." But Sarah's resolve only strengthened with each concerned question. She could still hear Rebecca's words echoing in her mind. "You don't understand life, Mom. You've never taken a real risk." Well, this would certainly qualify as taking a risk. By evening, she had made an offer on the house on Maple Ridge. Not just any offer, but a cash offer that was $15,000 above the asking price, with a closing date just 30 days away. Rebecca noticed her mother's unusual behavior immediately. "Mom, why are you being so weird today? And why do you keep smiling like that?" Sarah just shrugged and said she'd had a good day at work, which was technically true since she'd accomplished more in one day than she usually did in a month. The secret felt like a living thing inside her chest, growing larger and more difficult to contain with each passing hour. Over the next few weeks, Sarah continued her secret preparations. She arranged for a leave of absence from the hospital, something she'd never done in her entire career except for when Rebecca was born. The paperwork felt foreign in her hands. After 3 decades of perfect attendance, the concept of stepping away from her responsibilities seemed almost revolutionary. She hired a lawyer to handle the complex financial arrangements, liquidating bonds and certificates of deposit that had taken her years to accumulate. She even drove past the house every day on her way to work, watching as the "for sale" sign remained in the yard, knowing that soon it would be gone. The hardest part was listening to Rebecca continue to vent her frustrations about her stalled career and her mother's boring life choices. "I saw Mrs. Henderson from down the E Street yesterday," Rebecca said one evening over dinner, stabbing at her salad with unnecessary force. "She was telling me about her daughter who started her own marketing firm and bought a house in California. Why can't I have that kind of success? Why can't I take risks like that?" Sarah just nodded and continued eating her soup, hiding the fact that in 2 weeks she would own a house worth more than most people made in a lifetime. Each complaint felt like a knife twisting deeper, but also like validation that she was doing the right thing. Rebecca needed to see that dreams weren't just for other people, that sometimes love manifested in the most unexpected and extravagant ways. The closing day arrived on a crisp October morning. Sarah had arranged to take the entire day off, telling Rebecca she had some errands to run. As she sat in the lawyer's office, signing document after document, she felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration that she hadn't experienced since Rebecca was born. The house was officially hers now, along with a mortgage payment that would stretch her budget to its absolute limits. Her retirement plans had been completely upended, her financial security had been thrown to the wind, and she had never felt more alive. The weight of the house keys in her palm felt like holding Rebecca's future, heavy with possibility and terrifying in its implications. You know, friends, as I share Sarah's story with you, I can't help but think about all the times we hold back from showing the people we love just how much they mean to us. Sometimes we get so caught up in being practical and responsible that we forget the power of a grand gesture, the beauty of taking a leap of faith for someone else's happiness. If this story is touching your heart like it's touching mine, I'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and join our community. Share in the comments below. Have you ever surprised someone you love in a way that completely changed everything? Your stories inspire me every single day. That afternoon, Sarah drove to the coffee shop where Rebecca worked part-time. Her daughter was behind the counter, looking tired and frustrated as she served overpriced lattes to customers who barely acknowledged her existence. Sarah watched her daughter for a moment through the window, noting the way Rebecca's shoulders slumped with each order, how she mechanically went through the motions of grinding beans and steaming milk while her mind was clearly elsewhere. Sarah ordered a simple coffee and waited until Rebecca's shift ended, then asked if she wanted to go for a drive. "I have something I want to show you," Sarah said, her voice betraying none of the enormous secret she was carrying. Her heart hammered against her ribs as Rebecca untied her apron and grabbed her jacket, completely unaware that her entire life was about to change. They drove through the familiar streets of Denver, past the elementary school where Rebecca had played soccer, past the library where they'd spent countless Saturday afternoons when Rebecca was young. The autumn light filtered through the windshield, casting golden shadows across Rebecca's face as she stared out the window, lost in her own thoughts about another disappointing day at a job that felt like it was leading nowhere. Finally, they turned onto Maple Ridge, the tree-lined street that housed some of the most beautiful homes in the city. Rebecca perked up immediately, her entire demeanor shifting as recognition dawned. "Oh, are we going to look at my dream house again? I know you think I'm silly for obsessing over it, but I just love everything about it. The way the light hits those front windows in the afternoon, the garden space, that reading nook in the front room." Her voice carried the same wistful longing it always did when she talked about the house, mixed with resignation that it would always remain just a dream. Sarah pulled into the driveway of the house, her heart pounding so hard she was sure Rebecca could hear it. The moving truck she'd arranged was already there, along with the small crew of movers she'd hired to bring over the few pieces of furniture she'd secretly purchased for the house. Rebecca looked confused, her brow furrowing as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. "Mom, what's going on? Why are there movers here? Did someone already buy it?" The disappointment in her voice was palpable, as if seeing the movers confirmed her worst. Fear that someone else had claimed her dream while she was stuck serving coffee and counting tips. Sarah took a deep breath, reached into her purse, and pulled out a set of keys. The look of confusion on Rebecca's face slowly transformed into something else entirely, as Sarah placed the keys in her daughter's hands. First bewilderment, then hope, then disbelief as the impossible truth began to dawn on her. "Rebecca," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "You said I don't understand life, that I've never taken a real risk or chased a dream. You're right about some of that. For 30 years, I've played it safe because I thought that's what being a good mother meant. But maybe it's time I showed you that the biggest risk I've ever taken was having you. And the greatest dream I've ever chased was making sure you knew you were loved." She paused, watching as Rebecca stared at the keys in disbelief, her hands shaking as she turned them over and over. "This is your house now, sweetheart. Your dream house. It's yours." The silence that followed Sarah's announcement seemed to stretch on forever. Rebecca stood frozen in the driveway, the keys to the $2 million house trembling in her hands, her mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. Sarah had imagined this moment 1,000 times over the past month, but nothing had prepared her for the look of absolute shock and disbelief on her daughter's face. "Mom," Rebecca finally whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of the movers unloading boxes from the truck. "What did you just say?" "I bought you the house, Rebecca. The one you've been dreaming about. The one with the solar panels and the green roof and all the innovative features you love so much. It's yours." Sarah's voice was calm, but inside she felt like she was free-falling. This was the moment of truth, the point of no return. Either this would be the most beautiful gift she'd ever given, or it would be the most spectacular mistake of her life. Rebecca looked from the keys to the house to her mother and back again, as if she was trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "But Mom, this house costs— how could you possibly— We don't have this kind of money." Rebecca's voice was rising with panic now, the reality of what was happening beginning to sink in. "Mom, Please tell me you didn't do something crazy. Please tell me you didn't mortgage your entire future for this." The tears were starting to flow down her cheeks, and Sarah realized that her daughter's reaction wasn't joy or excitement, but fear and overwhelming guilt. Sarah had prepared for many possible reactions, but she hadn't fully prepared for this one. She reached out and took Rebecca's hands, keys and all, in her own. "Sweetheart, listen to me. Yes, I used most of my savings. Yes, I took out a mortgage that will change how I live for the next 20 years. But I did it because you were right about something. I have been playing it safe, and I have been afraid to take risks. But the truth is, the biggest risk would have been letting you think that I didn't believe in your dreams." The front door of the house opened, and the real estate agent, Jennifer Walsh, stepped out with a warm smile. "Congratulations, Sarah. The movers are just about finished with the initial setup. Rebecca, your mother has been planning this surprise for weeks. She wanted everything to be perfect for you." Jennifer handed Rebecca a thick folder of documents. "These are all the architectural plans for the house, the sustainability reports, and the maintenance guides. Your mother thought you'd want to study every detail." Rebecca opened the folder with shaking hands, her eyes scanning the technical drawings and specifications that she'd always dreamed of having access to. The house featured radiant floor heating powered by geothermal energy, a rainwater collection system, smart home technology that could be controlled entirely through a phone app, and a green roof garden that was maintained through an automated irrigation system. It was everything she'd talked about wanting to design someday, everything she'd pointed out during their weekly drives past this very house. "Mom, I can't accept this," Rebecca said, though her fingers were tracing the architectural drawings with obvious longing. "This is your entire retirement. This is everything you've worked for your whole life. You can't just give it all away because I was being a brat and said some horrible things to you." The guilt in her voice was overwhelming, and Sarah realized that her grand gesture was causing her daughter pain instead of joy. "Rebecca, look at me." Sarah's voice was firm but gentle. "Do you remember when you were 8 years old and you wanted to take violin lessons, but we couldn't afford them? I picked up extra shifts for 6 months so you could have those lessons. Do you remember when you were 16 and you wanted to go on that school trip to Washington, D.C., but it cost $800? I sold my grandmother's jewelry to make that happen. Do you remember when you were applying for college and you needed help with the application fees and the deposits?" Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her face as she remembered all the sacrifices her mother had made over the years. "Every single time, you told me it was too much, that I shouldn't sacrifice for your dreams. And every single time, I told you that seeing you happy and fulfilled was worth more to me than money or security or playing it safe. This isn't any different, Rebecca. This is just bigger." Sarah gestured toward the house, with its gleaming solar panels catching the afternoon sun. "You said I don't understand life, but here's what I understand. Life isn't about playing it safe or holding on to money or following the rules that other people made. Life is about love, and love sometimes looks like complete insanity to everyone else." Rebecca was sobbing now, clutching the architectural plans to her chest. "But Mom, what if I fail? What if I can't make the mortgage payments? What if I can't find work in my field? What if this whole thing is a disaster?" Her fears were pouring out now, all the insecurities and doubts that had been hiding behind her criticism of her mother's safe choices. Sarah realized that Rebecca's harsh words hadn't really been about her mother's life at all. They'd been about Rebecca's own fear of not being brave enough to chase her dreams. "Then we'll figure it out together," Sarah said simply. "I didn't buy you this house so you could stress about mortgage payments, sweetheart. I structured the financing so that between my salary and your part-time income, we can make this work. And I didn't buy it so you could live here and give up on your career. I bought it so you could live here and finally have the confidence to pursue the career you've always wanted, knowing that you have a foundation, a home base, a place where you're loved no matter what happens." The next few hours passed in a blur of emotions and logistics. Rebecca walked through every room of the house with the wide-eyed wonder of a child on Christmas morning, touching surfaces, testing light switches, and reading every technical specification aloud to Sarah. The house was even more impressive on the inside than it had appeared from the street. The main living area featured floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with natural light, while the kitchen boasted energy-efficient appliances and countertops made from recycled materials. The master suite included a walk-in closet and a bathroom with a soaking tub positioned to take advantage of the mountain views. "Mom, look at this," Rebecca called out from what would become her home office. "This room has built-in desk space and custom shelving for all my design books and supplies. It's like whoever designed this house knew exactly what I would need." Sarah smiled, remembering how she'd spent hours on the phone with the interior designer, describing her daughter's interests and career aspirations in detail. Every modification, every custom feature had been chosen with Rebecca in mind. As the sun began to set, they found themselves sitting on the deck that overlooked the city of Denver sprawled out below them. Rebecca was still clutching the house keys as if she was afraid they might disappear if she let go of them. "Mom, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice quiet and serious. "The things I said to you about being safe and boring, I didn't mean them. Well, I did mean them, but not the way they sounded. I was angry at myself, not at you." Sarah waited, sensing that Rebecca needed to get something important off her chest. Her daughter continued, "Every time I got rejected for a job, every time someone told me I didn't have enough experience or that my ideas were too ambitious, I came home and saw you living this quiet, stable life, and I got jealous. Not of what you had, but of how content you seemed with it. I wanted to be content too, but I was too afraid to try for what I really wanted and too proud to admit that I was scared." "What are you scared of, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, watching the lights begin to twinkle across the city below them. "I'm scared that I'm not as talented as I think I am. I'm scared that my ideas are just dreams and that I don't have what it takes to make them reality. I'm scared that I'll try and fail, and then I'll have to admit that I wasted years of my life chasing something that was never going to happen." Sarah reached over and took her daughter's hand. "Rebecca, do you know what I was scared of for the last 30 years? I was scared that I'd made the wrong choice in playing it safe, that I'd wasted my life being careful and responsible when I should have been taking risks and following dreams. I was scared that I'd raised a daughter who would make the same mistake I did, who would let fear keep her from becoming everything she was meant to be." The conversation that followed was unlike any they'd ever had. For the first time in years, maybe ever, they talked honestly about their fears, their regrets, and their hopes for the future. Rebecca admitted that she'd been sabotaging her own job interviews because she was terrified of succeeding, almost as much as she was terrified of failing. Success would mean responsibility, expectations, the pressure to live up to her own potential. Sarah admitted that she'd been using Rebecca's presence in the house as an excuse to avoid dating or pursuing her own interests, because it was easier to focus on her daughter's life than to figure out what she wanted for her own future. "You know what's funny?" Rebecca said as they watched the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. "I always thought you stayed in that little house because you couldn't afford anything better. I never realized you stayed there because it was where we'd built our life together, where all our memories were. I never thought about how lonely it might be for you when I move out." The realization seemed to hit her suddenly, and she turned to face Sarah with a stricken expression. "Mom, I can't take this house. Not if it means you'll be all alone in that empty house, struggling to pay bills because you spent all your money on me." Sarah had been waiting for this moment, had prepared for this exact concern. "Rebecca, I'm not going back to that house. I sold it last week." The shock on Rebecca's face was immediate and complete. "You what?" she gasped. Sarah smiled, pulling a second set of keys from her pocket. "The guest suite downstairs, with the separate entrance and the kitchenette, that's going to be my apartment. If you'll have me as a housemate, that is." The plan had been forming in Sarah's mind for weeks, ever, since she'd first toured the house and seen the beautifully appointed guest suite on the lower level. It had its own bathroom, a small kitchen area, and a private entrance that would allow both women to maintain their independence while still being close enough to support each other. Sarah had calculated the finances carefully. By selling their old house and moving into the guest suite, she could afford her portion of the mortgage payments while still maintaining a reasonable quality of life. You mean we'd both live here? Together but separate? Rebecca's voice was filled with a mixture of relief and excitement. Mom, that's perfect. I could help with the mortgage payments, and you wouldn't have to live alone, and we could finally have the kind of relationship where we're both adults, but still family. The tears were flowing again, but this time they were tears of joy rather than guilt and overwhelm. The first few weeks of living in the house on Maple Ridge were an adjustment for both women, but it was an adjustment filled with laughter, discovery, and a new kind of closeness that neither of them had expected. Sarah found herself delighting in small luxuries she'd never allowed herself, taking long baths in the soaking tub, reading books on the deck while watching the sunrise over the mountains, cooking elaborate meals in a kitchen that was actually large enough to accommodate her love of baking. For the first time in decades, she felt like she was living in a space that reflected who she was rather than just what she could afford. Rebecca, meanwhile, threw herself into learning every aspect of the house's innovative systems. She spent hours studying the solar panel efficiency reports, experimenting with the smart home technology, and researching additional sustainability features that could be added over time. More importantly, the confidence that came from living in her dream house began to translate into professional confidence. She started applying for jobs again, but this time, she approached the interviews differently. Instead of apologizing for her lack of experience, she talked passionately about the green building features she was living with every day, the practical knowledge she was gaining from residing in a sustainably designed space. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after they'd moved in. Rebecca had been interviewed for a position with Morrison Green Design, a boutique architectural firm that specialized in eco-friendly residential projects. The interview had gone well, but Rebecca was competing against candidates with years more experience. Then the principal architect, David Morrison, mentioned that his firm was struggling with a particular client who wanted to retrofit an older home with modern sustainability features, but was concerned about maintaining the property's historical character. Actually, Rebecca had said, I might be able to help with that. I'm living in a house right now that successfully integrated historical preservation with modern green technology. The original structure dates back to 1925, but it's been updated with geothermal heating, solar panels, and smart home systems without compromising the architectural integrity. I could show you the solutions they used, if you're interested. What Rebecca didn't mention was that she'd spent the previous week researching the house's renovation history specifically because she'd been curious about how the designers had achieved such a seamless blend of old and new. David Morrison was more than interested. He asked if he could visit the house to see the integration work firsthand, and Rebecca found herself giving an impromptu tour to one of Denver's most respected green architects. As she walked him through the house, pointing out the hidden ductwork for the geothermal system, the way the solar panels had been integrated into the roofline to complement rather than detract from the home's classic lines, and the smart home hub that had been cleverly concealed within the original built-in cabinetry, she realized that she was speaking with the confidence and expertise of someone who truly understood sustainable design. Rebecca, David said as they concluded the tour, I've been in this business for 15 years, and I've never had a candidate who could speak so knowledgeably about the practical applications of green building technology. The fact that you're living with these systems daily, understanding their strengths and limitations from a resident's perspective rather than just a designer's perspective is invaluable. I'd like to offer you the position, and I'd also like to propose that we use your house as a case study for our next client presentation. My dear friends, as I continue sharing Sarah's incredible story with you, I'm reminded of how often the most beautiful gifts in life come disguised as risks, as leaps of faith that seem impossible until we take them. Sarah's decision to buy that house changed everything, not just for Rebecca, but for both of them in ways they never could have imagined. If stories of courage and love like this one inspire you, please consider subscribing to our channel and ringing that notification bell. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever taken a risk for someone you love that seemed crazy to everyone else? Share your story with our community. Your experiences and insights make these conversations so much richer. Rebecca's new job at Morrison Green Design was everything she dreamed of and more. She found herself working on projects that challenged her creatively while allowing her to make a real difference in how people lived in relation to their environment. Her first major assignment was designing a net-zero energy renovation for a Victorian-era home, and she approached the project with the practical knowledge she'd gained from living in a successfully renovated historical property. Her design won an award from the Colorado Green Building Guild, and suddenly Rebecca Matthews was being recognized as one of Denver's rising stars in sustainable architecture. But the most profound change wasn't in Rebecca's career. It was in the relationship between mother and daughter. Living in the same house but maintaining separate spaces allowed them to develop a friendship that had been impossible when Rebecca was still struggling to establish her independence. They began having coffee together on the deck each morning, sharing their plans for the day and their thoughts about their respective challenges and successes. Sarah started taking evening classes in creative writing at the local community college, finally pursuing the dream she'd set aside 30 years earlier. Rebecca encouraged her mother to join a hiking group for women over 50, something Sarah had always wanted to do but had been too self-conscious to try. The house became a gathering place for both women's expanding social circles. Rebecca hosted dinner parties for her colleagues from the architecture firm, while Sarah organized book club meetings and potluck dinners for her writing class. The sustainable features of the house became conversation starters that led to deeper friendships, and both women found themselves part of a community in a way they'd never experienced before. 1 year after moving into the house on Maple Ridge, Sarah and Rebecca decided to host a celebration, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had been part of their journey. The guest list included Rebecca's colleagues from Morrison Green Design, Sarah's classmates from her writing program, neighbors who had become friends, and even Jennifer Walsh, the real estate agent who had helped make the impossible purchase possible. As Sarah prepared appetizers in the beautiful kitchen and Rebecca set up a display of her architectural projects on the deck, both women reflected on how completely their lives had changed. The house itself seemed to pulse with anticipation, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows that Rebecca had fallen in love with during their first visit. Sarah found herself pausing at the kitchen island, remembering how her hands had trembled the first time she'd signed the mortgage papers, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. "Mom," Rebecca said as she arranged photos of her latest sustainable housing project, "I need to tell you something I don't think I've ever said properly. Thank you. Not just for the house, though obviously that's been incredible. Thank you for showing me what real courage looks like. I spent so many years thinking that being brave meant being reckless, taking wild risks without caring about the consequences. But what you did, that was calculated courage. You took an enormous risk, but you did it thoughtfully, strategically, with a plan for how to make it work." Her voice caught slightly as she spoke, and Sarah noticed the way her daughter's fingers traced the edges of the photographs, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood whenever she was trying to express something important. Sarah paused in her food preparation, touched by her daughter's words. "Rebecca, I have to be honest with you about something. When I bought this house, I thought I was doing it to prove a point, to show you that I could be spontaneous and bold. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was really doing it for me too. I was tired of being afraid, tired of playing it safe, tired of letting life happen to me instead of actively creating the life I wanted." She wiped her hands on her apron and turned to face Rebecca fully, seeing in her daughter's face the same determination that had driven her to make that impossible purchase. The afternoon light cast everything in a golden glow, making this moment feel somehow sacred, like they were finally saying things that had needed to be said for far too long. The party that evening was magical in a way that neither woman could have anticipated. Rebecca's boss, David Morrison, spent an hour talking with Sarah about her writing projects, and by the end of the conversation, he'd commissioned her to write marketing copy for the firm's new website. Sarah's hiking group leader, Maria Santos, was fascinated by Rebecca's work and mentioned that her husband's construction company was looking for an architect to help them transition to more sustainable building practices. Connections were being made, relationships were forming, and both women realized that their willingness to take risks had opened doors they never could have imagined. The house filled with laughter and conversation, The sound of clinking glasses and animated discussions about art, architecture, and dreams yet to be realized. Sarah caught herself thinking that this was what happiness looked like. Not the quiet contentment she'd once mistaken for fulfillment, but this vibrant, dynamic energy of people pursuing their passions and supporting each other's growth. As the last guests were leaving, Rebecca and Sarah found themselves alone on the deck, looking out over the city lights, just as they had on that first overwhelming day a year ago. "Mom, do you remember what you said to me when you gave me the keys to this house? You said that the biggest risk would have been letting me think you didn't believe in my dreams." Rebecca turned to face her mother, her expression serious and thoughtful. "I want you to know that what? You did change more than just my living situation or my career prospects. You changed how I think about love, about sacrifice, about what it means to support the people you care about." The city sprawled below them, twinkling like stars, and Sarah felt a profound sense of peace settling over her, as if all the worry and uncertainty of the past year was finally dissolving into this perfect moment of understanding between them. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious about her daughter's perspective. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I grew up thinking that love meant not being a burden, not asking for too much, not expecting people to make big sacrifices for your happiness. I thought that being independent meant never needing help, never accepting gifts that cost other people something significant. But what you did showed me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is accept someone's grand gesture, even when it scares you." The evening breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the garden below, and Sarah found herself remembering all the nights she'd lain awake worrying about money, about whether she'd made the right choice, about whether she was teaching her daughter the right lessons about responsibility and love. The conversation that followed was one of the most meaningful they'd ever had. Rebecca talked about how living in the house had given her the confidence to pursue not just professional success, but personal relationships as well. She'd started dating someone she'd met through work, something she'd been too insecure to do when she was living in her mother's basement and working at a coffee shop. Sarah talked about how her writing classes had connected her with a community of creative people she never would have met if she'd stayed in her old routine of work, home, and nothing else. They spoke about the ways that taking risks had changed not just their external circumstances, but their internal landscapes as well. How Sarah had discovered a capacity for boldness she never knew she possessed, and how Rebecca had learned to accept love without feeling guilty about deserving it. "You know what's funny?" Sarah said as they prepared to go inside for the night. "I bought this house because I wanted to show you that I wasn't boring and safe. But it turns out that taking care of the people you love isn't boring at all. It's the most exciting adventure there is." Rebecca laughed, remembering the harsh words she'd spoken more than a year ago. "I can't believe I called you boring. Mom, you bought a $2 million house to make a point. That's probably the least boring thing anyone has ever done in the history of mother-daughter arguments." The memory of that fight seemed so distant now, like something that had happened to different people entirely. People who didn't yet understand that love and practicality weren't opposing forces, but could work together to create something beautiful and lasting. As they turned off the lights and headed to their respective living spaces within the house, both women felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. Sarah had learned that playing it safe wasn't the same as being responsible, and that sometimes the most responsible thing you can do is take a leap of faith. Rebecca had learned that accepting help wasn't a sign of weakness, and that the people who love you want to see you succeed, even when it costs them something precious. The house settled around them with the comfortable creaks and sighs of a home that was truly lived in, truly loved, no longer just a symbol of dreams deferred, but a testament to the power of believing in each other and having the courage to act on that belief. 2 years later, Sarah Matthews sat in the audience at the Colorado Architecture Awards ceremony, watching with pride as her daughter Rebecca walked across the stage to accept the Young Professional Excellence Award. The citation read her accomplishments over the past 2 years, designing 3 award-winning sustainable renovations, publishing articles in 2 national architecture magazines, and establishing a mentorship program for young women entering the field of green building design. As Rebecca stood at the podium, thanking her colleagues and clients, Sarah felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with vindication and everything to do with seeing her daughter fully realize her potential. I want to take a moment to thank someone who's not in the architecture field, but who taught me the most important lesson I've learned about design, Rebecca said from the stage, her eyes finding Sarah in the audience. My mother taught me that the most beautiful structures aren't just about innovative materials or cutting-edge technology. They're about creating spaces where people can become the best versions of themselves. She showed me that sometimes the most sustainable thing you can build is confidence, hope, and the belief that dreams are worth pursuing no matter how impossible they seem. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion as she remembered their heated arguments in that cramped apartment kitchen. When Rebecca's dreams seemed so distant and unattainable, she thought of the countless nights she'd second-guessed her decision, lying awake calculating mortgage payments and wondering if she'd lost her mind. The applause thundered through the auditorium, but all Sarah could hear was the echo of Rebecca's words from 2 years ago. "Mom, you don't understand life." Now, watching her daughter's graceful confidence as she fielded questions from reporters, Sarah realized they had both learned something profound about understanding life. It wasn't about playing it safe or accepting limitations, but about recognizing when love requires bold action. Rebecca's acceptance speech continued with heartfelt gratitude toward her team and mentors, but her voice cracked slightly when she added, "Most importantly, thank you to my mom, who showed me that believing in someone sometimes means making impossible choices look effortless." The words hung in the air like cathedral bells, resonating through Sarah's chest with a warmth she hadn't felt since her own mother used to braid her hair on Sunday mornings. She watched Rebecca's hands gesture elegantly as she spoke about sustainable design principles, the same hands that used to sketch impossible buildings on napkins during their McDonald's dinners when money was tight. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that she'd spent decades in accounting, calculating risks and managing budgets with conservative precision, only to make the most financially reckless decision of her life for love. Yet here sat the proof that some investments couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. The ceremony concluded with a standing ovation, and as Rebecca descended from the stage, her eyes locked with her mother's across the crowded auditorium, both women smiling through tears that spoke of journeys completed and dreams finally, beautifully realized.